I used to think you were going to take something and put it in one of those columns, change or accept. And what I realized is that I realized that the thorny things in life are going to go in both columns. They're going to both need to be accepted and they're going to need to be changed.
Awareness, the final frontier. This is Awareness Explorers.
Welcome back, fellow explorers, to Awareness Explorers. Good to have you. And I'm the co-host, Jonathan Robinson. I'm with my trusted friend and co-host,
Brian Tom O'Connor.
And as often happens, we have a guest that we're excited about interviewing and interrogating. And he has a new book out, which I'm actually quite interested in knowing a little bit more about. But let me introduce you to Eric Zimmer. Many of you know him as the award-winning creator of the One You Feed podcast, which has over 50 million downloads. That's rather impressive. But a little bit about Eric. At 24, he was homeless, addicted to heroin, and facing prison. And his journey from these depths sparked his lifelong inquiry into human transformation and resilience. His story and his work have been featured in the media, including TEDx and many other places. And his new book is How a Little Becomes a Lot: The Art of Small Changes for a More Meaningful Life. Well, welcome to the podcast, Eric.
Thank you, guys. It's lovely to talk with you again.
Yeah, I love your podcast, and you have probably a huge number of episodes now. How many?
It's probably over 850, more than the world probably really needs, if we're being honest about it. That's a lot. That's a lot of stuff out there. But if you're a One You Feed fan, you should probably never run out of material, because we just keep releasing them too. So
yeah, and like Brian and I, you've gone to interview a lot of really interesting people, which we'll dive into a little bit. But Brian, I want to give you an opportunity to ask the first question.
Oh, thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, Eric, as our listeners know, we talk a lot about the two-wing analogy. And you could summarize that as the outer and the inner, or the psychological and the spiritual, and the idea being that without one of the wings, you'd fly in circles. And it seems to me that your book, How a Little Becomes a Lot, is the epitome of the two-wing analogy. So to kick it off, I'd like to quote from your book. You wrote, "From a certain angle, this book is two books in one, because in reality, our inner and outer lives are never separate. Working on one necessarily works on the other. The principles for developing a wiser inner life make it easier for you to change your outer life, and your behavior in the world affects our inner life to the same degree." So that kind of approach is very dear to our hearts. Is that how you conceived of the book originally, to cover both of those areas?
I didn't actually originally conceive of it that way. I conceived of it more as what a program I taught for a number of years that was called Spiritual Habits was, which was using principles from behavior change to develop our inner life. At the same time, I was doing one-on-one coaching all these years on helping people change behavior. And my story, one of changing a big behavior, right? Addiction. So it was there. And so what ended up happening was I realized that if I was going to bring everything that I sort of talked about and believed in together, I was going to need to bring those two parts together. And I spent time debating whether that was really a good idea. Was I doing too much in one book? And yet, the more I thought about it, I was like, but it's incomplete if I don't have both, right? And I'm glad you read what I said, because I don't think I can say it any better. But these two things are essentially this. I mean, they're the same thing. We talk about them separately, but it's like the Zen, form is emptiness, emptiness is form idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can distinguish them, and it's useful sometimes to distinguish, this is an outer behavior, this is an inner thing. But ultimately, they are so deeply intertwined that we're talking about essentially the same thing.
Yeah, and there are a few books that try to cover both. I know I wrote a book called The Enlightenment Project that was kind of trying to do that as well. And it seems like people polarize into camps nowadays. And just the inner, just the outer, just make money, doesn't matter, money doesn't matter, just find inner peace, whatever.
Yep.
And do you find that in the clients that you work with that they're always thinking that dichotomy?
I think, yeah, at least the clients that people who are attracted to me are, yes, they're not so dichotomous, I would say.
Mhm.
They're people listening to the podcast who are aware of that in some way, right? They have outer concerns, as we all do, and yet they know that their inner life is really important also. And so I do think I attract people that are a little bit more into nuance, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. It's a
Mhm.
nuance thing. And I don't know if choosing to put both those things together was the right choice for a commercially sellable book. I don't know, but it was the right choice for me, and it was the right choice to reflect what I see as a holistic picture of things.
Mhm. Well, I have a confession. I haven't read your book. I read the Amazon thing, and somehow you managed to get nothing but 5-star ratings. So congratulations. That's not easy to do. But from my perspective, where I haven't read the book, it sounds very similar to, say, the book Atomic Habits, which has only sold 25 million copies. So obviously, there's not a market for something like that. But how would you say it for people who have read Atomic Habits?
Yeah.
How would you say your book differs from something like that?
Yeah. Well, we're going to take the two wing analogy a slightly different direction, but here we go again, because I think that to make change, there are two things we have to sort out. The first I call structural. It's things like, do we have a good plan? Do we know what we're doing? Do we have people to support us? Have we set up our environment to make it possible? All these
Mhm.
things, structural. And then the second is, even when we have all that, there comes the moment where we sit at a choice point and we either go the direction we want to go or we go the direction we don't want to go, or we go the direction our wiser part of us doesn't want us to go. And we have to learn to master that conversation also. What I think James's book does really, really well, and others in the space, is they nail the structural. They do a very good job of explaining all that. And I have my
Mhm.
own approaches to some of that, and I borrow from James. He's been an influence. So I have that in the book. But what I think Atomic Habits and a lot of other books in this space don't do is they don't get into the fact that there is emotion and real humanity at that choice point. And
Mhm.
we have to learn to navigate and negotiate that if we're actually ultimately going to be successful in changing something.
Mhm. Yeah, I love the way you say that because I haven't really heard much about that choice point. You do hear a lot about, changing the structure, making the environment more helpful. The way I've dealt with that, and I also, coach people, is I do this thing called a contract where it says, like I'll meditate 20 minutes a day this week, I'll go to the gym 3 times this week. And if I fail at any of those things, I will rip up $1,
Mm-hmm.
which is really kind of a additional structural approach
Yep.
that's been extremely effective, but it doesn't really attend to what you're talking about. So I'm wondering, as a coach or in the book, how do you navigate that? How do you suggest people navigate that, call it choice point question or choice point pattern?
Yeah. And I love your approach. It's a well-known, approach, which is you add an additional incentive to the
Yeah.
behavior or a disincentive. And those are all valuable. And you're right. I would probably lump that under structural. In the book, I identify something I call the 6 saboteurs of self-control. And when you write a book, you got to come up with all kinds of you got to get your own little fancy frameworks, right? So there's another of my fancy frameworks. But what they are is I tried to identify what are the common traps that we fall into in that moment, because in that moment, what's happening is we're either feeling or thinking or saying something to ourselves that is causing us to go, as I said, in the direction that the best part of us wishes we didn't. And so the good news about all the structurals, it does force us to a choice point. And at that choice point, then what we can do is examine what is it that I'm thinking, feeling, or saying to myself in that moment. So I use an example of me writing this book. This Writing a book was very difficult for me. It's my first book, very challenging. And there were lots of times where I would sit down or be trying to sit down and write and facing a lot of resistance. And so there's different strategies we can use. Sometimes it was just enough for me to say to myself, well, what do I want most? Oh, it's to write a book. What do I want now? It's to, sit on the porch. Okay, what I want most is more important. That's enough. Sometimes what I realized is my brain was telling me that I can't do it. I'm not good enough. It's self-doubt. So I
Hmm.
needed to learn how to talk myself through self-doubt. Other times it would be that would feel like, well, what's one day of writing actually matter? I call that the insignificance trap. We're not connecting the dots between all these different things. So there are different things that happen in the choice point, but the key is just to analyze it for yourself. What is it that I'm thinking, saying, or feeling to myself? And what could I say? What could I experiment with that would just get me over the hump? Not to solve self doubt perpetually forever, because you can't, just enough to get me to take the action.
I have a question for you, Brian.
Yes.
You use probably more spiritual techniques than I do throughout your day. You're retired, and you have all these little things that you do, and I'm wondering how this works for you. How do you manage to do that?
Well, this is an interesting question because it certainly ties in with the title of Eric's book. I was a student of Locke Kelly for several years, and you do quote him as saying small moments many times a day. And I what I do is whenever I feel anything that I think I might not want to feel, I just pause and look inside and ask a question: what knows this experience? In what does this appear? And to quote Rupert Spira, awareness accepts what the mind rejects. And then I just identify with awareness. And I find that for me brings about a kind of a peace and equanimity, actually a kind of a giddy joy that seems to bubble up. And it's not an idea that I'm going to get something in the future, like enlightenment. It is right now, and it's always there, always available. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's
Well, it does. You've created a alarm system
yeah,
that has become automatic.
that's right. It's second nature now.
Yeah, that's really great. I have a framework in the book I call still points, which is something similar to that.
Yeah,
It's a it's it's intended. There's two types of still points. There's proactive ones that you schedule in. So maybe every time you go to the bathroom, you have a still point. Or there's reactive ones, which is like something happens inside you. That's the trigger. What we're looking for is a trigger. And then what you have is a very clear then, right? So a still point is a when X happens, then I'll do Y. And you have a very clear then, right? Then I will ask this very simple question. I mean, that's so good because you've got both the trigger and you've got a very clear action to take, and that you keep doing it. It does, even though you're not trying to build towards anything, it does accumulate in the sense that your awareness gets your ability to connect to awareness probably gets stronger the more you do that.
yeah, it really does. And I my metaphor for it is like putting drops of oil in a pan. There's separate drops, and then at one point one drop touches another, and it becomes a bigger drop, and keep going, and it fills the whole pan. And the title of your book, "A Little Becomes a Lot," you wrote comes from a Tanzanian proverb. Is that right?
I think so. I think I've heard the Tanzanian proverb, which is that little by little, a little becomes a lot, which I've
Yeah.
just always loved and resonated with since the first time I heard it. I also love the drops in a pan analogy, right? And I think we all know this idea, at least on some level, right? Will say something like Rome wasn't built in a day, or how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? We all understand it, but it's much harder to put it into practice and keep putting it into practice because it's so decidedly unshowy, you know?
Yeah, yeah. So, Along that line, let's say you're working with a client, a lazy spiritual client that wants enlightenment. His name happens to be something like Jonathan or something, and you're trying to get him to use something like what Brian suggested.
Mm-hmm.
How would you coach such a person? What would that look like?
Well, I would say that we would use the still point method. And the point of the still point is that, again, little by little, a little becomes a lot. The way we change entrenched thought patterns and patterns of reaction is to interrupt them a lot, right?
Mhm.
That's the only way that it happens. The problem is we don't remember to do it. So I would counsel Jonathan. I would first talk about the use of the term lazy, and I would say that behavior change is a skill, and it's a skill we're going to learn.
Uh-huh.
Let's drop the pejorative. But after we work through that, I would suggest taking something. We have an app, it's called Minder. And you set it to go off a certain number of times a day randomly, and you can put in a little prompt. And so I would say you have that go off, say, 5 times a day, and the prompt is Brian's little question. Each time it goes off, you just try and connect to awareness for a second. As you do that, as you proactively do that, you will begin to string more moments of connecting awareness through your day, so that when the moment comes that Brian's talking about, which is, oh, I'm feeling something I don't like, you're much more likely to then remember, oh, I want to connect to awareness because you did it 5 times yesterday and 3 times today. You're
Mhm.
you will develop that alarm system more naturally that way. So the proactive then leads to us being able to have more of that. I call it the holy grail of triggers, which is the emotional state. We recognize our emotional states much faster, much sooner, and we know how what we ideally want the response to those to be. So that would be there are other apps. You could just set an alarm on your phone. You could just say, every time I go to the bathroom, I'll ask myself this question. Lots of different ways to structure that trigger, but that's how I suggest it.
That's great. And that whole brings up the whole issue of how technology can help our spiritual evolution. And what I've seen is I've set up sometimes alarms like that.
Yep.
I like the idea of the prompt. I haven't done that. But I noticed that everything kind of quickly becomes mechanical.
Yep.
So how do you deal with that issue?
Well, I think it's a matter of, this is where a contemplative practice of some sort is valuable, right? Because in that contemplative practice, there's a moment to reconnect with why I'm doing it. Because I
Mhm.
agree, if I'm not connecting regularly in the morning or something, what I'm doing with the alarms that are going off on my phone, I just ignore them, right? We all probably have 3 or 4 calendar things that are in our phone. For whatever reason, they're on the calendar. We just ignore them. I don't know why they're still on there, why we don't get rid of them, but we pay them zero attention. And these
Right.
sort of things can become like that unless we're connecting back to the reason we're doing it. But that's true of any behavior that we want to sustain over time. Is there are periods where we have to reconnect to, like, why does this actually matter to me?
Yeah, I had my old teacher used to say, what gets you to eat the next bite of chocolate is your previous bite of chocolate. So if it's been a long time, you go, I don't need any chocolate. But if you just had a bite, then it's like, I want some more chocolate.
I love that phrase, and that's absolutely true. I mean, there's no way to build a rich inner life without some degree of awareness and intent, right? I
Mhm.
mean, if you're not motivated to do it, you're not motivated to do it at the end of the day, ultimately.
Doesn't matter how many alarms are going off.
No, no. Now, that's not to say that it's just as simple as just do it, right? Because I jokingly was saying I would take away the word lazy, but one of my core beliefs is that changing things is a skill. We
Uh-huh.
can learn it. It's not a character failure. Um, but you can't change something that ultimately you're not motivated to change.
Yeah.
You may be in what they would call in the trans-theoretical model of change, the stages of change model, you might be in a contemplation or a pre-contemplation stage where you're starting to think maybe you want to change it, but you're just not there yet.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that brings to mind a term that you used in the book, motivational complexity. You also called it the soup of competing priorities or wants. And sometimes our motivation, I mean, we can connect to our motivation, but sometimes we have two opposite motivations.
Yeah.
And that seems to be a big roadblock.
Yeah, I've joked that this chapter nearly killed me, because I was trying to write a simple chapter about intention,
Mhm.
and I ended up writing about 55,000 words before I was done on one stupid chapter. And again, it was the second chapter in the book. Like I said, it nearly was the straw that broke the I can write a book camel's back. Because as I got into it, I was like, oh my God, this is complicated. Like, we are complicated creatures inside. You know, we want all kinds of things. And so in the book, I try. So let me back up. So yeah, I did use the term motivational complexity. I have a podcast called The One You Feed about these two, say two wolves inside of us. If only it were so simple. Um, so recognizing motivational complexity is important because then we are not thrown off and we are not surprised by or disappointed in ourselves when we find competing things going on inside of us. So I then kind of said, all right, let me try and simplify this inner landscape to two things, and values and desires. And I'm intentionally oversimplifying, because if you start asking psychologists or even spiritual traditions about what all is inside of us, they're going to have all kinds of answers. There's needs, and there's wants, and but I just kind of said values, desires. And values I described as what the best part of us has decided is worth wanting.
Mhm.
And then desires are the things that just show up. You want them whether you want them or not.
Mhm.
They're just there, right? And so the first kind of clash that a lot of us face day to day is simply a values versus desires clash. I call it, what do I want most versus what do I want now? That's that, right? What I want most
Mhm.
is my value. What I want now is this other thing. And there are lots of techniques. There's a lot in the book about how we navigate that thing, right? And some of it is what we talked about before. The more structural you are, the less you run into those conflicts, the better prepared you are for them, and you know how to navigate your choice points.
Mhm.
What gets trickier is values to values conflicts, and we all have some of them. The classic one is a working mother. She has two values. She probably values her career, not just for money, but she might value it because it's what she does, and she values her family. And those two things are in tension. They're actually never not going to be in tension. So it's more a matter, instead of thinking that that's going to get resolved, it's a matter of just learning to dance with it a little bit more. I have two values that are diametrically opposed. One of my values, I've realized, is adventure. Like, I feel most alive when I'm out doing something I haven't done before, or I'm pushing some limit, or I'm in the new. I also have a value based on my spiritual practice of being content wherever I am, no matter what. These things are in constant tension with each other, because the adventure side of me is yelling, go, 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 go out, go out, go out. We need more. We need more. The contentment side of me is like, settle down, just sit right here, right? So I recognize those things are in tension in me, and I work to honor them both the best I can.
I find that fascinating, really, Eric. And it seems to me that the idea of allowing everything to be as it is sometimes misunderstood, because one of the things that we need to allow is that we have these urges for adventure
Yes.
or other things, that someone needs help or that something in society does need to change, and we're the person best able to make a contribution.
Yeah, I had a couple insights in the not too distant future. One of them was while writing the book, because I'm semi obsessed with that question of the serenity prayer, right? What do I accept? What do I change?
Yeah.
And I kept
Could
thinking
you
that,
just, for this, before you go on, for our audience who might not be familiar with it?
yeah, it's a prayer that's been mainly popularized through 12-step meetings. It was written by a theologian whose name I can never pronounce, so I'm not going to try. Uh, but and it's longer than this, but the popularized short version is: God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah,
And
beautiful.
I think that wisdom is the $1 million question. Now, I used to think you were going to take something and put it in one of those columns: change or accept. And what I realized as I worked on this book, as I tried to ask myself, how do I end a book about change with chapters about accepting everything exactly the way it is? Like, how do I reconcile these things? Is that I realized that a lot of things in life, the thorny things in life, are going to go in both columns. They're going to both need to be accepted, and they're going to need to be changed. So the example I use is my depression. Now, it's pretty well managed. I had pretty strong clinical depression in my younger years. It's pretty well managed, but it's not gone. So that is something. Take my depression as the topic. Do I change it? Do I accept it? Well, I do both. Right? There are things that I know make me less likely to be depressed, keep me in better mental health. And there are things that I know help when I am depressed. So I do those. And a big part of my way of coping with it when it occurs is to go, oh, look, it's here again. No big deal.
Mhm. Which sounds like a version of our two-wing experiment or a two-wing analogy, and being able to sense when one wing is way too strong compared to the other wing.
100%.
Yeah.
That's a great way of saying it. I love your analogy, because you're right. It's such a good analogy that if one of those wings is too strong, you fly in circles.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I loved your distinction, which I really haven't heard before. I like this, the values versus desires, or what do you most want versus what do you want now? And we had a interview with a woman, I think named Cindy, very awakened being. And in asking her how her awakening happened, she said it was based on the question, what do I most want now?
Hmm.
And what I most want now is always peace or love or something like that, as opposed to cookies or, some other or a TV show.
Yeah.
And she just kept following that, which fascinated me as a great spiritual technique. Can you really do that? And it seemed to really work for her. So I'm going to try that. What do I want most, and see if I can follow that. It seemed like that worked for you, Eric, in terms of your past, and it really did make a tremendous difference, especially when you were an addict and dealing with all that stuff.
Yes, it is a question. It's one I use all the time still.
Hmm.
It is
Hmm.
a question that I often ask myself, because or it's a framing that I use, right? Because I
Yeah.
recognize that there's a conflict. There's resistance. I mostly see it as resistance to me.
Uh-huh.
Right? It's more about not doing something that I know is what my higher self wants me to do, than it is for me these days so much about trying not to do certain behaviors. I feel like I'm not struggling with that at this current moment very much, but it's often resistance to doing the thing. And so I often will just recognize um, another saying that I use to myself is to say to myself, oh, you do want to, you just don't feel like it.
Hmm.
Right. And the reason that's valuable is, instead of inside of myself saying, I don't want to, I don't want to, I don't want to, I recognize that a big part of me does want to. It's just that I don't feel like it. And for whatever reason, that flips it in my mind. And I go, oh, this is a mood.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm pretty clear that I don't want moods running my life. If you have a mood system like mine, you do not want it in charge of things. So I'm pretty clear on that. So for me, when I make that flip and I go, oh, I just don't feel like it, I go, oh, okay, well, that's temporary. What you want most is real.
Yeah. Yeah. I've also come up with a word because I couldn't find it in our uh, language, which the word is blisistance, and it means resistance to bliss.
Mm,
And when I use that distinction, because like meditation is actually my favorite thing to do in the world, and yet there's resistance to it every single day.
amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, and 5 minutes into it, the resistance disappears.
Yep.
But if I were sensitive to thinking, oh, if there's resistance, I shouldn't do it, I would never meditate.
Yep.
So that's an interesting distinction. When you're trying to raise your vibration or trying to do the right thing or whatever, there's usually some form of resistance. I call it like spiritual gravity. Uh, and it's not a problem. It's just that's how the universe seems to operate.
It is. I mean, I've asked this question on my show over the years, and I get various answers, most of them evolutionary psychology based, about like, well, if we follow basic reward theory, which says that we do the things that feel good, every single time I've exercised over a long career of it now, right? I'm not a young man. Every single time I've gone, oh, I'm so glad I did that. You'd think I would run to exercise,
Yeah.
and yet I don't. There's just resistance, and I'm like, it is just bizarre that there's just there's some initial. I like your gravity is a great word. I think of it a lot of times like launching a rocket. You need a lot of fuel to get
Hmm.
the rocket away from gravity. Once you do, it just goes. It's the same thing. I
Yeah.
find with a lot of these things. It just takes a little bit more fuel right in the beginning.
Yeah, right in the beginning. That's the key. I often tell myself with projects for that I'm resisting, once begun, it's half done.
Yeah.
And I find that really helpful. Also, I also struggled with resistance to exercise. I also struggled with resistance to meditation and many things around meditation that I thought I was failing at, like doing it at the same time every day or
Yeah.
doing it in the right way. And it wasn't until I basically stopped yelling at myself or criticizing at myself for all of those. In other words, I stopped resisting resistance
Yeah.
and I stopped thinking that failing at doing something was necessarily automatically a bad thing. And it eased things up.
Yeah.
It created a little inner release that's almost paradoxical.
I think that what, behavior science has taught a lot, right? It's illuminated a lot of things. And one of the things it's illuminated is that motivation goes up when we feel good about ourselves or we feel good about our chances of success. And it goes down when we feel bad about ourselves or bad about our chances of success. And so what you're describing, the meditation is the classic one. If I think I'm failing the whole time I'm meditating, which is if my like let's say I'm doing a breath meditation, if my goal is to stay on the breath, I fail far more than I succeed. And if I view it as failure, no wonder I don't want to do it, right? No wonder I don't want to do it. Who wants to do something you fail at every 8 seconds? Once that changes, once that reframe is completely done, and you go, oh, actually, that's me succeeding
Hmm.
because I'm catching it. All of a sudden the relationship to meditation changes. I mean, I had an aversive relationship to meditation for probably the first 25 years I tried to do it. Now, am I exaggerating? Not by much, no.
Yeah, I really find that rings true that you're catching it. Your mind wanders one more time, and instead of saying, "Oh, you stupid mind, you're wandering," you say, "Yay, I caught it." It changes everything.
Yeah, I mean, I know in the books I was reading about meditation and all the years before there was an internet, before there were apps, before there were teachers everywhere, I know the books were telling me some version of that. Like, don't be so hard on yourself when your mind wanders. But for whatever reason, I wasn't hearing it clearly enough. Like, I needed that point emphasized times 100 in my case.
And everybody needs different reframings or different techniques to get them to the next level. And that's part of our job, is to find what those are. I
Yeah.
get asked a lot. I've written 16 books and 197 songs. And people ask me, how do you do that? Like, are you really disciplined? And I go, there's no discipline. Well, no, I say there's a slight discipline. I made a vow with myself many years ago that I would write for 5 minutes a week. And I've kept that vow. Now, it's not very disciplined, but it does get me sitting down once a week for 5 minutes. And there's two types of things that happen. Lousy writing, in which case I'm done for 5 minutes and I've succeeded in completing my vow. The other type is that because I sat down, there's an opportunity for grace or a download of some kind, and I am excited and moved to write for maybe 5 hours because the energy of the universe is moving through me. That's not a discipline. That's like, woo-hoo. So it's interesting to see that different things work for different people, but if you get the first step, a lot of times then some other force takes over and does most of the work for us.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I came up with this, but that, we think that motivation precedes action, whereas sometimes, yes, but it also goes the other way around.
Yeah.
Action then drives motivation, right?
Right. That's a wonderful distinction. I haven't
Yeah.
put it into nice words like that. Thank you. You're good at this, Eric.
I have not written 19 books or 100 or 187 songs. That's
197 songs.
I, songwriting. I used to be a songwriter, and I have not written a full song with lyrics in a long time. Someday it's going to happen again, but I still make stuff up on the guitar all the time, but
Yeah.
I've not been able to connect the dots on the full songwriting and lately.
5 minutes a week, Eric. That's all it takes.
Okay. All right. I'm going to try it.
Well, you talk about something similar when you in your book when you talk about meditating for 3 minutes,
Yeah.
as opposed to trying to, say, okay, I'm just going to do 3 minutes.
Yep. Yep.
I have a
Yeah.
question about a term you used in your book that I didn't fully understand, but I found it very intriguing. The term is there is no view from nowhere.
Mm.
What does that mean?
It means there is no view that isn't from some particular perspective. There is no way to step outside of perspective, conditioning, bias. There's no place to go where we see things objectively. It just
Oh,
doesn't exist.
yeah.
And so we think that we're often going to that place, and it's worth trying in some cases to go to that place, but we have to recognize it just doesn't exist. We are always seeing the world through our view of it. We can't help it. I mean, enlightenment might be a version of getting pretty close to that,
Mm-hmm.
right? My enlightenment experiences, I would say they are closer to that. But even then, I don't think I would say that I'm perceiving the world without any kind of filter. I just don't think that happens to us as humans.
The fact that we have a body means that there's filters going on.
Yeah.
Exactly. So
I
that's
don't feel that it has to happen. In other words, it's like, I always say that the big secret of non-duality is that it includes duality. And
yeah,
that the way humans are designed, or not designed, but the way it works is that there's a point of view and we see things from the point of view. But there's also a way of getting to the larger picture in which all points of view appear that doesn't have an opinion about any of them.
I agree with you, and that's what I say when I think that's kind of what enlightenment is. Unfortunately, even that then gets filtered back through a human brain. I mean,
Right.
but I think it's semantics, or maybe it's not. I don't know. But I love your point that there's no any non-duality also includes the fact that there's duality in it. Yep. Um, but I do think that's what we're all aiming at to a certain
Mhm.
degree. Those of us who are pursuing something that looks like awakening or enlightenment, we are pursuing a view from nowhere, or a God's eye view, or you call it different things. I just think that we should never presume we have it,
Yeah,
because that's dangerous.
yeah. You've now done 800 some odd podcasts and have interviewed a lot of people. We just finished our 200th podcast a couple months back, and we were kind of thinking about what have we learned? What were the most important points? What are the themes that have gone through over and over again, just hitting us in the face? And I've wanted to ask you the same question. Is there anything that keeps on showing up that maybe you were surprised by from all these wise people you've interviewed?
Well, I mean, in some ways, the book is my synthesis
Mhm.
of all of that to a certain degree. Obviously, filtered through my own life and my own history.
It's a tough question.
It's a very tough question. Um, I've said this before, but I've had this insight long enough that I don't know if I can still call it surprising. But earlier in the cycle of things, I think if you'd ask me, like, what are the key steps to living a meaningful life, or as I say in the intro to the podcast, a life worth living, I would have said it was all about going internal.
Mhm.
And I think what, at least, again, it's not a surprise, because I would say probably this insight came 5 years ago, was that it's equally important what's going on outside of us, and the connections that we have with people, right? That people and connections with people are huge. It's such an important part of what makes life worth living. So I think that was initially a surprise to me. I'm trying to think about what.
Well, that's a good one because I think it's not commonly understood by either group. So the people who are just trying to control their life to be the way they want, they don't necessarily get the importance of an inner life, and the same with opposite with people with the inner life. And that one realization, which which wolf is being more fed, is really a key ingredient. And I think it changes through a person's life. So sometimes you're called to do one or the other more, but over a period of time, you want to kind of have a balance that seems to work.
You need two wings, to quote a couple guys I know.
Huh.
Who are those guys? Who are the, what's that movie from? Anyway, but you answered that question pretty well in your book, and you mentioned that the most important factor in your personal journey was the help and support of others.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of people think the spiritual life is a solitary
Yeah.
life. And, the inner, it's all about the inner journey. And I think others are pretty important. And also, there have been recent studies about people's longevity and happiness, and
Yeah.
that the more people interact, the more of a social life they have, the longer they live, and the healthier and happier they are.
Yeah, I mean, Robert Waldinger, who's also a Zen teacher, also ran the Harvard study about
Mhm.
that. Basically, all their data came back and said, like, quality of relationships is the number one indicator of longevity and health. Like, he would just say, period. Now, I'm a little bit more nuanced than that. I would say, well, there's probably a lot of things that count, but it's worth realizing. And I do think that's one of the things that I have found. What's the word for subscribing to a tradition that has, and by that I'm going to largely say Eastern thought, I think that, and that has been filtered to me through a Western lens. I think there have been two things that are challenging about that, have remained a challenge for me my whole life. The first is Sangha, finding a true community around me. Where I live in Columbus, there is not a robust meditation community of any real sort. And I think the fact that we have filtered mindfulness and contemplative practice through our Western lens is a much more individualistic lens, right? We design the things that sell in today's world are things that people can go off and do by themselves without having to connect with other
Mhm.
people. And that's what those of us who are interested in that have to a large extent, unless you happen to live in San Francisco or certain places, at least for me, has been that lack of a true in-person sangha that like friends of mine who are Christian can go find easily.
Yeah.
I do feel like that has been, um, I've wanted that. I've missed that. I quote in the book, and I feel like I fact checked that this is actually in one of the sutras, but I feel like Ananda, Buddha's right hand man, came to him once, and the Ananda said something to the effect of, other people in the sangha is like half of the whole picture, and the Buddha said, not so, not so, Ananda. They are all of it.
Oh.
Now, again, I for a guy who promulgated a middle way philosophy, to say that it's all of it is not a very middle way take. But I think it points to it's more important than we think. And I don't know why what I was telling you earlier was a surprise to me.
Mhm.
Why I was surprised that other people were so important, considering that they had saved my life twice through 12-step programs. I have no idea. Maybe it was just the seduction I had towards this idea of being this solitary creature that goes inwards and finds everything he needs within. But my experience has certainly been that that's not when I've done most of my growth, both of a spiritual and other type. I think I changed more spiritually when I was practicing with a Zen Sangha regularly, even though it was virtual,
Mhm.
than I have any other period for me.
Yeah, there used to be a very active satsang community in New York where all these teachers would come regularly, and there were certain venues that we'd all go and we'd all know each other and go out, and that kind of dried up, and now it's individual on Zoom. But there still can be that sense of community even on Zoom.
Yeah, it is certainly better than not having it. I agree. And I've one of the things I've tried a lot through my years of doing this podcast is, can I create a community of the one you feed people,
Yeah,
who could support each other? And I've had some success in this, like some groups that have started, still meet 5, 8, 7 years later, and they now meet in person. I mean, so I've had some success. I've also had the vast majority of it be people meet when I have them meet, but after that, it all fades away. It's
yeah.
just harder, and people say they want community, but less and less of us, and this is true for me too, commit to actually doing it.
Yeah. Also,
Yeah.
I think that there's an ebb and flow to each person's life. Like, I mean, the classic example of Ramana Maharshi, and I'm not saying that if we're not Ramana Maharshi, like we're failing, but he lived in a cave for quite a while and then came out of it and had an ashram where he interacted with people every day
Yep.
and got involved in cooking the food and sharing it and everything
Yep.
and
Both
reading
wings.
newspapers.
Yeah, both wings.
Yeah.
It's why I love silent meditation retreats, to be honest with you. I love them because it's both. It's
Mhm.
like I'm going deeply inward. I am, and it is you're not talking to anybody, right? So it is a very internal inward thing, and yet we're not alone at the same time. There
Yeah.
is an energy of those other people, of the support of the people around us. I find it a lovely container in that way.
Mhm.
I lived in a communal situation for about 20 years. And people don't realize that there's great things about it, and there's also really difficult things about it.
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends that say, "Oh, we want to create a community," and I go, "Yeah, good luck," and almost all of them fall apart.
Yep.
Because you really need a very strong spiritual reason to do that. AA is an example where people have a really strong reason. And unfortunately, with a lot of the spiritual systems around, the commitment isn't quite tight enough because we're living in a sea of individuality messages.
I agree with you 100%. That is part of the conclusion I've come to, is that because part of what I wanted to create for people was like AA for people who don't have alcoholism,
Right.
right? Which was what I wanted to create, was what I find so beautiful about 12-step programs. It's not, I'm not involved in the same way that I was, but I still find it beauty, which is people coming together, talking about real things, sharing real honest things, and being deeply committed to each other's growth and support. That's a
Mhm.
beautiful thing. And I wanted to create, I've wanted to create that. Um, and like you, part of the conclusion I've come to a little bit is there's not enough of a binding factor in
Mhm.
that, in the way that there is in AA, or in a very thin sort of lineage idea, like a very strong spiritual tradition with a strong approach and method. That there needs to be, it can't be amorphous. And
Mhm.
that's part of what I think a lot of people, including myself, have tried to create, is a more amorphous, container like that. And I think you're right. There has to be a very strong binding agent in there.
Any ideas?
I mean, I think they're out there. No, I don't. I mean, I'm honestly on the horns of this dilemma right now. We have a community that we've been trying to nurture. Um, and I just don't know. I don't know how much effort is worth continuing to put into something that is such a hard lift,
Mhm.
right? Um, and I'm not ready to build a community that is oriented just around me, because A, nobody probably wants that, and B, that's not a role I want to play. But that does seem to be what certain communities get, is they coalesce around a teacher or a guru.
Yeah,
That's
If
that's the binding agent.
yeah, I agree. I'm a member of or co-host of a Zoom meetup group around a particular teacher, and it is a very warm, open, supportive, continuous community. Small though, and it's not dogmatic around that teacher.
Mhm.
Everybody is totally able to disagree,
Yep.
and there's not a limit to what anyone can say, as long as it's from our own experience and not parroting
Yep.
something somebody else taught.
Yep. I think I could learn from you on this one.
if you can find a kind of ritual that you can get into people's lives. I was in a relationship workshop 9 years ago, and they got us into small groups of 6 people just to process that workshop. And we decided, why don't we meet for an hour once a month on Zoom just to talk about how our relationships are going?
Hmm.
That was 9 years ago. We haven't missed a month since then.
Yeah.
It's just into the calendar. It's an hour a month. We've all agreed it's helpful. It's about what we can learn about relationships, and it's done. And it's served us all really well over the last 9 years.
Yeah, like I said, I've had successes where these groups that I've put together, they go on to have a life of their own, where like there's a number of them that continue to meet. One group meets every week, and they travel all around the country to see each other. I mean, it's kind of
Oh.
astounding. A lot of other groups still meet every month, and so it takes some of the time. It takes some of the time, but I do think what we're talking about is, um, I think what I've created is not narrow enough. It's not binding enough.
Mhm.
Sometimes the personalities bind enough to each other that it works. I mean, you guys are probably part of these. I mean, I'm part. I will do an experience with a group of people. I did one last year. We hiked 75 miles in 4 days. right? And so we were training beforehand, and we were carrying 25-pound packs. We were out in the woods, bonding experience. And of course, at the end, we're all going to be best friends. And then the first month, there's a lot happening. The second month, but you get 6 months later, and it's far fewer people. I think that's just more the norm, and I think that's okay. Also, actually, right? I think there's a place for that, and there's a place for an ongoing supportive community.
I've been in theater all my life, and every play I do, whether I'm an actor in it or a director, I have this feeling I am so close to these people. I love these people. These are going to be my friends for life. And then we go on to the next play and we don't keep up.
Yep.
Sometimes, with rare exceptions, we do. But we carry over that feeling from
Yes,
one set of people to another.
that's beautifully said. I never thought of that. Wow. Yeah, you're right. We carry over
I
the feeling
That
of
just occurred to me now, actually.
yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's really well said. I think that's exactly what happens. I had an experience recently. I'm promoting a book. I pestered you, Brian. I probably pestered you, Jonathan. I basically pestered. If you came across my path in the last 25 years, you probably got pestered about this book, right? I'm so glad that period of my life is over. It was a deeply uncomfortable one, and yet one I committed to doing. But I realized I talked to some people that I worked with, say, a decade ago, that I was incredibly close with. But of course, as it happens, we just, we're barely in touch. A second into the call with them, though, it was like their voice, it was just so resonant. It was so them. I was like, holy mackerel, like, I can't tell you a lot of what we did, all that, but they are still crystal clear the moment I reconnect with them because we spent so much time together.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there anything that you'd want to be asked that we haven't asked you about?
Hmm. No, I don't have a particular agenda.
Yeah.
I'm happy to go wherever you guys want, but I think this is, we've covered a lot of good stuff, but I'm also, well, there is, I mean, since you guys are an awareness explorers podcast and you're a little bit about awakening, I do tell an awakening story in the book that we haven't talked about.
Then shoot.
Okay. So this was on retreat with Adi Ashanti, who's one of my favorite teachers. I was fortunate enough to get to sit down and interview him a number of times, which was amazing. And I was on a retreat with him at Omega Center in New York, and it was by traditional metrics not going well. And what I mean by that is when I sat down to meditate, I was either asleep or my mind was racing and my back was hurting. It just every time. I just felt like this is, you know how it gets sometimes. You're like, what am I doing here? This is not, none of this is working. This sucks.
No, we can't relate whatsoever to any of that, but okay.
Yeah. So I'm having that happen. And I'm just generally, I mean, I'm struggling. It's hard. And he's talking about he uses a phrase that I have that chapter in the book called allow everything to be exactly the way it is. I'm like, all right, whatever. And I'm at dinner that night. I don't know if you guys have ever been to Omega, but there's a big front porch on the dining hall. And it was a lovely fall evening, and most people were choosing to eat out on the porch. And I, for whatever reason, chose to sit indoors, but near the porch. And the way you got from the dining hall to the porch was via this door. And this door had a spring on it. It was one of those doors that when you open it, if you let it go, it's like, bam, shuts. So I'm sitting there, and person after person goes through this door, and they just let it go. Bam, 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 bam. And I am a noise sensitive person. Like I don't filter it out well. And so I'm sitting there and I'm thinking like, what is wrong with these morons? Do they not know that we are on a silent retreat? Like I'm seething.
Uh-huh.
And I remember this allow everything to be the way it is. And so I think he also said something about saying yes to life. So every time that door would slam, I would say yes, yes, yes. And it helped a little bit. But I got up, and as I walked away, I was like, you know what? I'm going to just keep trying to do that. So everything that came up, yes, whatever it was, my mind's wandering. I'm feeling like I shouldn't be on retreat. My leg hurts, whatever it is, all through the evening. Yes, 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 again and again and again. And the next morning, we're sitting down to meditate. I'm doing the same thing, and I'm doing it during the meditation practice. Just yes, I'm falling asleep. Yes, my mind's racing. Yes, my back hurts. Yes, yes, yes. I just keep doing it, and my back just keeps, hurting. And but I slowly just felt this energy start building within me. And when I stepped outside, the only way I know how to describe it, it was just like boom, and the lights went on as far as like what we would traditionally call satori or kensho in Zen, an awakening experience.
Mhm.
And it was overwhelming in like you guys know, you can't put words to these things. You can try and describe them. The words fall incredibly short, but it was a basic, deep sense of being part of an unbroken, complete whole. you know deep unity. I wasn't like, I couldn't tell the difference between me and a tree. I could, but I also would tell you on some level me and that tree are not any different. Now intellectually I know that, but this was that felt experience of it. And it was not like a 2-minute experience. It lasted, I mean, the intense part of it lasted a few weeks, and then it slowly started sort of tapering down after that. But that's why I have the chapter in the book about allowing everything to be the way it is, because I do know that that is, on some level, that is a path to an ultimate freedom. If I knew how to get there all the time, I would just go do it. Um, but I just love that story of me sort of transforming my one of my greatest irritations in life into into that happening on the backside of it.
I love that story. And I just, something so similar happened to me in a very early satsang. Pamela Wilson used to come to Sufi books in Manhattan. And to get in, went through the bookstore and went into their room where they had events. But once it started, you had to enter from a door that led right out to the street. And it was winter, and everyone would come in, and they would come in, and they would slam this door, and latecomers, I mean, once, because she always started with a 5 minutes of silence. So we're sitting there in silence. The latecomers would come in with their incredibly noisy down coats that they would all take up. And I would sit there seething, saying, "This isn't silence. What are you talking about, silence?" And then all of a sudden, something popped in. I don't know where it came from, popped into my head. That's not the silence she's talking about. She's talking about the silence in which the noises appear.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
it's so similar. And I love that whole thing about yes.
Yep.
It's so wonderful and so well described too.
Yeah. A great movie for our listeners is the movie Yes Man with Jim Carrey, which kind of does a whole movie about that experience.
Really?
Yeah, no, it's
Never
definitely
heard
worth
it.
watching for
Okay.
sure.
Great.
Um, and the lesson being that we need more slamming doors if we're going to awaken. Or there might be another lesson in there too. But that's a great story, Eric. And I hear that you have a guided meditation that you can guide us on that might relate to that.
Sort of. I do have a guided meditation. I don't know if it's a yes meditation, but
Mhm.
but but I do have one to walk us through. This is something that it's an approach I came up with as I was a Zen student, and I would get frustrated because in certain Zen traditions, they just, their whole thing is called Shinkantaza. It just basically means sitting there. And in certain traditions or lineages, they will not give you much more than that. Just sit there. I'm like, okay, but that's not very helpful. Like, what am I supposed to do while I'm sitting here? Just sit there. And so I was kind of like, and then finally one day, a teacher said to me, just pay attention to, it'd be common to you guys, like what comes up, just what shows up, your breathing, and what you're feeling and what you're hearing. And so I created this little type of meditation uh, for a lot of people like myself who could use stickier anchor points, right?
Mhm.
And so it's called sit, listen, and breathe. So I'm just going to walk us through that.
Great.
So just settle into whatever your meditation posture of choice is. Just take a moment to arrive. Notice the inner weather, the inner landscape. And what we're going to do is we're going to move through these different ways of seeing what shows up in awareness. So, sit just basically means notice something in your body. Listen is exactly what it sounds like. Pay attention to a sound. And breathe is follow one cycle of your breath. Pay particular attention to the moments where the breath stops, where it pauses, where it begins to come out again, where it pauses at the bottom. And what we're going to do is we're going to move through those three things in a rhythm. I'll guide us through the rhythm to start, and then I'll let you pick up your own rhythm. So sit, notice something you can feel, listen, something you can hear. Now breathe, cycle of your breath. And then we're back to sit, listen, breathe. Sit, body sensation, listen, breathe. Now I'm going to let you go at your own rhythm for this for the next couple minutes, just cycling through. Now keep doing that, but let the edges blur on those categories a little bit. As you transition out of noticing the body, see if you can listen at the same time, if there can be a little overlap between your sitting and your listening, and a little overlap between listening and breathing. Continue the rhythm, but just let those boundaries blur a little bit. And now, finally, for the last minute, let the three merge into one field of awareness, one thing where you're able to notice any of them, perhaps all of them at the same time. Ding. So that's the end of the meditation. And the goal is to get you to a state like Shinkantaza, where we just sit. And that's a wrap.
That was fascinating. I haven't had a meditation like that before, instruction like that before. I really liked it. And, normally my attention is short. So starting off with sit and then listen and breathe. Yeah, like I can do like 3 seconds of sitting and 3 seconds of listening and 3 seconds of breathing, and before my mind wanders. So then going on to the next one was really interesting to keep me pretty focused. And then, of course, blending them is a whole other experience.
Yeah, I found that wonderful too, because a lot of people don't really understand how to notice awareness. And I found that when you ask them about two different awarenesses of two different things, like awareness of breathing, awareness of body sensations, just simply asking the question, are there two awarenesses in which they appear? Can you experience them at the same time? Automatically, you're there. You've just looked at awareness. You've just noticed awareness.
Hmm. That's a great pointing question for sure. Yeah, I think it's a useful one for people, again, when your attention is less steady,
Yeah.
right? It's a little bit, for me, there were a lot of things that changed my relationship to meditation, but one of them was when I discovered just sitting outside and listening, just basic sound meditation.
Yeah.
I completely, after just doing it a few times, I was like, oh, this is what people are talking about, like when
Mhm.
they say they like this,
Yeah.
because it was just a little bit stickier of an anchor than the breath. And I
Hmm.
think for a lot of people, even this resting in open awareness is a great meditation, but it I find those either deeply profound or profoundly just like the rest of my life. I
Mhm.
mean, it's just my brain running. And
Yeah.
so, yeah. Anyway, I'm glad you guys liked it.
Yeah. And I always thought you have to start with the content of awareness and walk yourself back. If the straight line to pure
Yeah.
awareness isn't so easy for people, and so I thought that was a great method. And also the other thing that you mentioned about the sound meditation is finding the thing for you that
Yes.
works for you is so important. Not this idea of this is the way this teacher taught me how to do it, and am I doing that right?
100%. I think if I had been encouraged, again, I tried to meditate from the age of 18 until today, which has been a long time. And most of those years were pre-internet, pre-apps, pre-everything. It was books. It was books because they're just there was like one strange guy teaching TM in Columbus or something. That was about it. And so, and the books the ones I read all started on breath. And I feel like if I had been encouraged to try different types of meditation earlier on, it would have been a different journey for me,
Mhm.
because me and the breath, I can do it now after steadying attention to a certain point, but it's still not my preferred way to do things. Um, and I wish I had alternatives presented to me much earlier in my career.
Yeah.
And now we have lots of alternatives, and sometimes people have a hard time finding what sticks with them.
100%. We have exactly the opposite problem.
We have the opposite
We've gone
problem.
from scarcity to abundance is our problem. Yes.
Maybe we'll find the middle way between them.
One
Well,
day.
hopefully that's what each person does and kind of figures out on their own, is
Yeah.
how to find that.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of support, how can people support you and know about your work? Obviously, the podcast, the book, anything else?
Well, if you go to oneyoufeed.net, that's oneyoufeed.net, you can find the podcast, you can find the book, you can find our weekly newsletter, you can find anything you want about me and what we do.
Great.
Great. And once again, the treasure trove of a book, How a Little Becomes a Lot, The Art of Small Changes for a More Meaningful Life. It's really a wonderful book. So congratulations on that. And Eric, what a delight to talk to you about all this. I could go on for hours. I think it's been so much fun.
Yeah, it's so great to see both of you again and talk. I always enjoy it.
If people want to support us and the work we're doing and get a bunch of extra stuff that Brian dutifully sends to you every month, I appreciate that, Brian. You can go to patreon.com/awareness explorers, and we send a lot of extra stuff to you for supporting us. Anyway, it's been really interesting conversation, Eric. I really appreciate it. I got some personal things I plan to do. One of them was to look at your app called Minder. That sounds very interesting, and many other things that you talked about as well. So thank you.
You are very welcome. You are very, very welcome, and thank you.
So until next time, friends, keep exploring.
Keep exploring.
Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast app. We'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love.